1953, a young woman training to become a teacher was told, in writing, that if she married, she'd have to resign, that she couldn't be seen in public wearing trousers, that she couldn't dye her hair, ride in a car alone with a man who wasn't family, or be caught inside a bar even on her own time, far from the classroom. Teaching wasn't just a profession in this era, it was a lifestyle, policed down to the smallest detail, from the moment she woke up to the moment she went to bed. Today, we're looking at the 10 rules that governed a schoolteacher's life in the 1950s. A few of these will surprise you. Let's begin. Rule number 1, the marriage ban. And if you watched our video on 1950s stewardesses, this one will feel familiar. In many American and British school districts, a woman was expected to resign her teaching position the moment she married. This policy, often called the marriage bar, had actually existed in various forms since the early 1900s, but it lingered stubbornly into the 1950s in plenty of communities, especially smaller and more conservative towns. The reasoning given at the time was almost identical to the airlines. School boards believed a married woman's attention would naturally shift toward her home and future children, and that she'd be less devoted to her students as a result. Some contracts spelled it out in plain language. Marriage meant immediate resignation, no exceptions, no appeals process. Just like the stewardesses we told you about, many young teachers quietly delayed engagements, kept relationships secret from school administrators, or married in private ceremonies far from their teaching town, terrified that word would reach the school board before they were ready to give up the classroom they'd worked so hard to earn. Rule number 2, strict dress code. What a teacher wore to work was rarely left up to her. Most school districts maintained strict, written dress codes for female teachers. Trousers were almost universally forbidden, considered far too informal and, in the eyes of many school boards, faintly improper for a woman in a position of authority over children. Hemlines had to fall at a modest specific length, not too short, but also not so long as to seem old-fashioned or severe. Bright colors and bold patterns were often discouraged in favor of muted, conservative tones. Jewelry needed to be simple and understated. Some districts even weighed in on hairstyles, expecting a neat, controlled look rather than anything considered fashionable or The underlying belief was that a teacher's appearance was a direct reflection of the school itself, meaning her wardrobe wasn't really her own personal choice at all. It belonged, in a very real sense, to the institution she worked for. Rule number 3, off-duty behavior codes. Much like the stewardesses we covered before, a teacher's conduct outside the classroom was considered just as important as her conduct inside it. Many teaching contracts from the 1950s explicitly forbade female teachers from being seen inside bars or taverns, even on personal time, even far outside school hours. Some districts required teachers to avoid riding alone in a car with any man who wasn't a direct family member. A rule meant to guard against even the appearance of impropriety in a small, close-knit community where everyone knew everyone else's business. In many rural towns, regular church attendance was quietly expected, if not formally required, as another visible marker of good moral character. A teacher wasn't just an employee during school hours. In the eyes of the community, she represented the values the school was meant to instill, 24 hours a day, whether she was grading papers or simply walking down Main Street on a Saturday afternoon. Rule number 4, approved boarding houses and curfews. Many young, unmarried teachers, especially those hired to work in towns far from their own families, were required to live in school board-approved boarding houses, often with a local family specifically vetted for the arrangement. This wasn't simply a housing convenience. It was another layer of oversight. These boarding families were sometimes expected to informally report on a teacher's comings and goings, whether she kept reasonable hours, and who she associated with in her free time. Curfews, while not always written explicitly into a contract, were frequently enforced through simple social pressure. A landlady noticing a light on too late, or a neighbor mentioning a car parked outside past a certain hour. For many young women arriving fresh out of teachers' college, this meant their very first taste of living away from home came wrapped in an entirely new set of watchful eyes, different from their parents, but no less present in their daily lives. Rule number 5, no smoking or drinking in public. Even simple, everyday habits that plenty of other adults enjoyed freely were considered off-limits for a school teacher, at least in public view. Smoking or drinking in any visible public setting could put a teacher's job at genuine risk, regardless of how she conducted herself inside the privacy of her own home. This wasn't usually about health concerns, at least not primarily. It was about image, and about the fear that a student, or worse, a student's parent, might spot their child's teacher with a cigarette in hand outside a diner, or a glass of wine at a restaurant, and lose confidence in her moral fitness to guide young minds. Some teachers describe going to great lengths to avoid being seen at all in these situations, choosing restaurants and stores outside their own town entirely, just to enjoy a quiet evening without the risk of a familiar face reporting back to the school board on Monday morning. Rule number 6. Full responsibility for discipline. Classroom discipline, no matter how large the class or how difficult the circumstances, rested entirely on the teacher's shoulders. Class sizes in this era were often considerably larger than what we're used to seeing today, sometimes 30, 35, even 40 children in a single room with no teaching assistant and very little administrative support if things became difficult. If a classroom grew unruly, the assumption was almost always that the teacher herself had somehow failed to maintain proper control, rather than considering the sheer scale of the challenge she was managing alone, day after day. There was little cultural acknowledgement, at the time, of how demanding this responsibility truly was. A teacher was simply expected to handle it, quietly and without complaint, regardless of the resources or lack of them she'd been given to work with. Rule number 7. Pay inequity. Even when a female teacher held the exact same qualifications, the same experience, and taught the very same subject as a male colleague down the hall, she was often paid noticeably less for identical work. This wasn't hidden or particularly disputed at the time. In many districts it was simply built directly into the official pay scale, with separate columns for male and female teachers listed plainly on the same document. The justification offered, when anyone bothered to offer one at all, was usually rooted in the assumption that a man was supporting a family, while a woman's income was considered supplementary, even in cases where she was, in fact, her family's primary or sole provider. It would take many more years, and considerable organized effort, before this gap began to meaningfully close. Rule number 8. No visible pregnancy allowed. A teacher was typically expected to resign the moment her pregnancy became visibly noticeable, regardless of how she felt, how capable she remained, or how much she wanted to continue working. This wasn't framed as a medical necessity. It was again considered a matter of appropriate appearance in front of young students. Many women simply vanished from their classrooms partway through a school year, replaced quietly by a substitute, with little formal explanation offered to the children she'd been teaching just days before. It's a quiet kind of loss that rarely made it into official school records, but it shaped the working lives of an enormous number of women during this era, all across both the United States and the United Kingdom. Rule number 9. The turning point. By the late 1950s and into the 1960s, something practical began to force change, faster in many places than any single protest or lawsuit could have on its own. A genuine teacher shortage swept across the United States and parts of the United Kingdom, driven by the enormous wave of baby boom children now flooding into schools that simply didn't have enough qualified staff to teach them all. School boards, faced with empty classrooms and overwhelmed administrators, found themselves with a difficult choice: hold firmly to the old marriage bans and rigid behavior codes, or quietly begin loosening them simply to keep enough teachers in front of enough students. Necessity, in this case, accomplished what years of unspoken frustration alone had not. Married women were gradually welcomed back into classrooms across the country. Some of the strictest off-duty behavior codes softened as school boards became more focused on classroom results than on policing a teacher's personal life. It wasn't a single dramatic moment of change. It was a slow, practical unraveling, town by town, district by district, driven much by simple demand as by any shift in attitude. Rule number 10. Then versus now. The quiet one that outlasted all the others. Today, a teacher can marry, raise a family, and continue building a long-respected career in the classroom, all at the same time, without ever having to choose one over the other. She's protected by unions, by employment law, by a workplace culture that finally recognizes teaching as a lifelong profession, not a brief detour before real life begins. It's worth pausing on that for a moment. The women who stood at those chalkboards in the 1950s, quietly navigating marriage bans and curfews and unequal pay, weren't given much choice in the matter. But their patience, and eventually their persistence, helped build the classroom we recognize today, one small, hard-won change at a time. If you had a mother, an aunt, or a teacher of your own who lived through this era, we'd love to hear her story in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this look back, you'll want to see this next one, just as unforgettable, waiting right here.